Welcome everybody to what CAFCASS officers need to know about mediation. Helen, will you please start sharing these slides? Thank you. Next slide, please, Helen. Okay, so welcome. My name's Romina Cameron. I am a fully accredited family mediator, and I've been practicing for 7 or 8 years now in the mediation industry. I'm also a PPC, which is short for a personal practice consultant, which means I train and support other aspiring trainees who are wanting to become fully accredited in mediation. I founded ARC Mediation, which is my own practice, and I'm also extremely pleased to sit on the board for NFM and also mediate through them and run various projects. I will now introduce Christine.
Hello everybody, my name is Christine Daniels. I'm also an accredited mediator. I've been practicing now for about 10 or 12 years. I'm based in Kent and I cover most of London and right the way through down to Thanet. I also am a PPC, looking after other mediators, etc. And I'm also qualified to speak with children in mediation. Next slide, please, Helen.
Okay, so I'm going to start in just a moment to talk about what family mediation is all about, just to make you all aware that there will be a Q&A session at the end, if hopefully we don't run over time. And you can obviously please put your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll do our very best to answer as many as we can. So what is family mediation? It's a process where a family who is experiencing perhaps a breakdown in their relationship or perhaps a change in their current arrangements need to work through various issues, and they need a third party and an impartial person to support them through that, and we call that a mediator. So what we do is we come in and assist those individuals work through their issues, communication, and help them reach an agreement that feels comfortable for them. Next slide, please, Helen. So when can mediation help? Generally, from the start. So as soon as an individual or individuals are experiencing issues that they feel they just cannot resolve, it could be following a separation or divorce. It could also be not necessarily two parents, but a mother and her daughter. It can be extended family members. Whenever people are finding themselves struggling with issues, then mediation can support them through that. So perhaps there are financial difficulties, perhaps there are arrangements for the children that just don't work anymore, issues that just cannot be resolved and people feel they're going around in circles. Perhaps those participants have been to court and court ultimately didn't help them resolve their issues and they're looking for an alternative solution. That's when mediation can help. Next slide, please. So what are the key principles of mediation? So all mediators will most likely be saying this from the get-go. So that first meeting we have with our participants, we'll be saying to them that mediation is voluntary. And by that what we're trying to say is you do not have to partake in the process. You could start mediation and decide it's just not for you. It's not, you don't feel comfortable continuing, and no one can hold it against you. So it's a very open process. It is confidential. So that means that participants that want to come and find out about mediation, they can share things with us and we will keep those conversations confidential. There are 2 exceptions which we let our clients know from that first meeting. Those 2 exceptions to that confidentiality are any safeguarding concerns involving children. We have a duty to report those. And in the event that it becomes clear or participants share any fraudulent activity in terms of money laundering, again, we have a duty to share those concerns, which breaks confidentiality. The mediator is impartial, and I think this is a really important one, especially when we see one participant first and then we go on to meet and speak with the second participant. It's really important to make them aware that we are there for both of them. We are not there to judge. We're not allowed to give advice. We are there to provide information and help them, but we are the same for both parties, and that's a really important one. And ultimately, what I tend to say to my clients is, you know, we're wonderful mediators, but we do not have magic wands. So it is a process that involves two participants to really work hard, you know, to try and figure out where they've gone wrong in terms of communication or their issues, and think towards a solution that might help them work through it. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of mediation? We tend to promote the fact that it can be less stressful. It should be less stressful than going to court. There are the exceptions, but generally as a process, it is less stressful. And it is tends to be much faster. It's not as time consuming. And often participants will say, well, I've come to mediation because it's a lot cheaper. And yes, there's a benefit too. It is definitely one of the most least expensive of the options that exist. But it does involve quite a bit of work, because essentially what we're asking from people that want to come into the process is, you're expected to do some work together and on yourselves and really hear each other. So it is slightly different. It's not adversarial in that sense. Because it is family mediation, we tend to focus always on the children's needs. So we ask and invite parents to think outside of what they want. And we also work on language. So, you know, it's not about what they want, but what do they hear from their children is what the children feel they want out of it. And Christine will go on to child inclusive mediation later on in the presentation. But from that perspective, we are always listening to what the child needs from the process. The participants feel more in control. So I tend to say to clients, the number of sessions, yes, as mediators, we don't keep participants in sessions for more than what they need to be. And, you know, the average generally tends to be anything between 5 to 7, but it can be less. And so they're in control as to how many sessions they have. They will feel whether they need another session. And it is very much forward focused. So because we tend to unpick together what is not working today in terms of their arrangements, or perhaps they're struggling with their financial settlement, they naturally, organically start to look at, okay, if I change this slightly, that will mean this will happen. And that just naturally means they start to look forward at the future, what it might look like. Next slide, please. So the continued benefits on this slide, I mentioned before about, you know, it being child focused. The voice of the child is central to family mediation where children are involved. And ultimately, the goal for anyone involved in mediation is really to put in arrangements that work, that are sustainable. That's not to say that participants don't come back later on. I think that's the wonderful thing about this process is, you know, I've seen clients only recently that I helped mediate 2 years ago. They came back because their communication had started to break down again, and they were going to hit the court button. And then they remembered, well, hang on, we've done this before and mediation worked out quite well. So they came back and we had to almost go back to basics, just remind them again the benefits of communicating and perhaps what was making them struggle and how we could help them focus on what would help their communication and ultimately help their arrangements. So it can really improve how parents are speaking to each other. And the wider impact is felt, for example, in this case that I just gave as an example, their child was really struggling at school. He'd started to feel the effects from the fact that the parents weren't communicating, and the drop-offs and pickups were starting to become a struggle. And it was affecting his schoolwork, and the school had to get involved. With us supporting parents in particular with their children arrangements, and ultimately those arrangements that they put in place, with them being more centered around what the child is saying they need, the child ends up feeling and doing better. So the effects can be felt at school, can be felt in their friendships, and ultimately you, the parents that are going through this conflict, feel better about what they're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So what is a MIAM? I've had some people call it a MIAM as well. And it's lots of words for a very simple concept, which is the first meeting between a participant and the mediator. And it stands for mediation, information, and assessment meeting. And it's that first initial step into finding out about the process and how it works. And we discuss alternatives as well. We explain to the first participant that we will always invite and give the opportunity to the other party to also have their initial meeting. There are, of course, situations where that is not something that the first participant wants to happen. And so we will ask why. And in some scenarios, it is not appropriate for us to invite the other person to their first meeting. Those situations tend to be quite rare. So that initial meeting is quite important. It's where we're able to tell them about the principles that I mentioned earlier on, about it being impartial and voluntary and confidential. And we also talk about what happens if mediation is just not suitable. Where do they go from here? What are the alternatives? And we discuss those at length. And we also do checks in terms of how would they feel participating in mediation? Do they feel comfortable being face-to-face? Would they want to do it online? How comfortable are they with doing mediation online? So we go through all of that. And as the mediator, we are assessing continuously whether mediation feels suitable. And it's not just at the initial meeting. Throughout the entire process, a mediator is constantly assessing whether, is this still right for them? Are we making the right level of progress? Do the participants seem engaged? Are they coming with ideas and solutions? Have they worked on their arrangement and they're tweaking it? So we're always assessing if it looks like we're moving in the right direction. And of course, where mediation is not working, or where perhaps it's just not possible to move on from that initial meeting, we also talk about the next steps, and we talk about the fact that with that initial meeting, they can then obviously be issued with a court form. We call it a C100 if it's a children arrangements order, a Form A for finances. Next slide, please. So in terms of is mediation suitable, following that initial MIAM, so the initial mediation information and assessment meeting, generally mediation tends to be suitable for most. There are some exceptions, and not so long ago I had a situation where a client needed to engage in mediation, but did not want to involve the other party. And the reason being is they'd been to mediation previously, and it had resulted in things becoming quite escalated, and there was proven domestic abuse, and she felt she couldn't have a voice. She felt that there'd be no point, and she felt quite threatened at the entire process of having to hear the other person's opinion and what they thought, and she just wanted that option to go through to court. Of course, in certain instances, not in that one in particular, because it was quite clear that she was even struggling with the initial meeting. So from a mediator's perspective, you know that that is not going to be suitable for them to engage in the process. But there are, of course, instances where if someone is slightly reluctant, they don't want to hear the other person or see their face, we offer shuttle mediation, where they're not seen together. So, individual separate meeting rooms, and we spend the same amount of time with both participants, and therefore they're then still able to be in the process, but they're not having to actually physically see one another or hear one another. And that's where impartiality is really important. And what I tend to say to clients is, I will be telling you exactly what the other participant wants you to hear. In some instances, and I'm sure some of you will be able to imagine the various scenarios, I will not be saying the exact words. I may have to slightly adapt some of the phrasing so that the message is received, but perhaps the delivery is slightly different. And that tends to work quite well. And we do make progress even using shuttle. So generally, mediation will only proceed if the case is safe and suitable, and we are constantly assessing that as the mediator. And also if both participants want to actually mediate. So what I have to say to clients is, great that you want to mediate. The other participant also has to say yes. And if they say no, that's where the mediation journey really ends. We cannot continue with mediation unless it's both of them engaged. Next slide, please.
Hello, everybody. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Christine. I'm now going to talk to you about child inclusive mediation, which is usually referred to as SIM. And it is a process that enables a child's voice to be heard throughout the proceedings when parents are going through perhaps a divorce or child contact matters, etc. We would usually see a child from the age of 10 and above. However, sometimes we will see younger children, depends on the circumstances. But the important thing is, and I think is very different to how it happens in court. So, for instance, those amongst you who've been into court and asked for a Section 7 report, it kind of automatically happens in court. Whereas in mediation, the very first thing we have to do is seek the parents' permission to see if they want child inclusive mediation. They will have had it explained to them about what it involves, etc. Providing both parents agree, we will then contact the child, and that happens through a process of we get some information from the parents about the child, what school they go to, who their friends are, what they like doing, all this kind of thing. And then we write to the child, obviously in a childlike way, and we ask them if they would like to come and see us. We obviously have introduced ourselves. I send a photo of myself. They can see who I am and what I'm trying to do. And if they agree, we're all good to go and SIM can happen. It's definitely a recognised benefit to health and well-being for both children and adults, actually. And it enables parents to hear a child's honest view, because as I'm sure you'll all know, a child will often say one thing to one parent and the total opposite thing to another parent. And each parent believes that that child is telling them the truth. So to have an independent person step in and meet with the children and just try and find out their views can be incredibly helpful. The children will understand when we meet with them that the meeting we're having with them is confidential, so we don't have to tell anybody about anything unless there's something of danger. But generally they can feel free to talk to us about things, and they're asked if they want us to feed back to their parents about the outcome of that meeting. If they do, all well and good, we will feed back, but sometimes they say no. In the 12 years I've been practicing, that's only ever happened once to me. And if that happens, we would then encourage children to speak to somebody that they trust and they know, like a friend or a teacher or a social worker, but just somebody who they feel that they can trust to try and see if they can help with anything. But generally, we will feed back to the parents if we have that permission. And I think it's also very important to know that we are not counsellors in this position. We are there merely to find out, what does the child feel about particular contact arrangements, etc., that type of thing. And we are literally only feeding back. Of course, we can give signposting, if we think there may be something that might help them, early help at school, anything like this that we could signpost them, but we can't tell them what to do. We are merely feeding back what their children have said. And we always make it very clear that it's the parents, ultimately, it's the parents' decision about what happens. It's not really the child's decision, but the child's decision about what they would like should form a very important part in the final outcome of where everybody gets to. Next slide, please, Helen. So what about, people often ask, if I go into mediation, the mediator's not legally trained as in being a solicitor, so how am I going to find out about legal advice and all sorts of things like that? Well, worry not. If you come into mediation at any time before, during, and or after, if you feel you need to go and seek legal advice, we would absolutely support that. That's not a problem at all. But we'd also support seeking other professional advice. So I would quite often say to my clients, I know a lot about a lot of things when it comes to mediation and being able to help you, but I'm not a specialist in every single subject. So therefore, if we are having discussions around perhaps particularly complicated pensions or capital gains tax matters or employment matters, I can certainly sort of give them some quite good information about various things connected to those issues, but I'm not a specialist. So I would either suggest they go and get that specialist information, come back and tell us so that we can work around that. But yeah, it's a great process in that they can move in and out depending on their needs and requirements. As mentioned from what Romina was saying about MIAMs, when we have that MIAM with them, we are also telling them about all the other methods of resolution that they have to legally resolve their problems. So, for instance, we don't just tell them about mediation, we will tell them about solicitor negotiation, including collaborative solicitors who are specially trained solicitors who can work together with a couple to try and sort out their problems. We can tell them about arbitration, which essentially is a method whereby you would engage you would hire a courtroom and a private court judge or similar, and try and work things out that way. Or you can go to court. So we sit with people in that MIAM and we tell them about those options, about roughly how long they take, how much they cost, what they would need to do, what they would need to find out about. And then they go away, the customers, the participants, they go away and they choose what the best option for them is. And it's just a great place to start. And talking about places to start, next slide, please, Helen. When should you refer to a mediator? The answer is anytime you like, when you've got a couple going through a dispute and they can't seem to get to the end and find out what they're supposed to be doing, etc., etc. Obviously, if they are just at the start, then that's a good time insofar as if they get that information in the MIAM about what all of their options are and what it involves and the sort of potential costs, they're much more fully informed to then move forward. But that doesn't stop participants coming in who have been entrenched for some time. I personally have had customers who've perhaps been working with solicitors for sometimes a number of years, and then decide, this isn't working, perhaps we need to try mediation. And we can always do, they can share types of resolution. So sometimes you could start with, like I just explained there, you could start with a solicitor and then maybe come to mediation, or come to mediation and then move out to one of the other options. And you must never really be put off by the 4 points that are mentioned here about, well, two people don't talk to each other, they're always arguing. Ramina mentioned earlier that you don't even have to see the other person in mediation if you don't want to. You can engage in shuttle mediation, where the mediator shuttles between the two of them and tries to reach agreement that way, and they don't have to see each other. Some people will say, oh, I know my partner will refuse to come into mediation. It's no point even trying. And actually, if I had £1 for every time someone had said that to me, I think I'd be quite rich by now. But what happens is when one person comes into the MIAM and agrees to come in, we then write to or contact the other person, and we explain to them that the other one wants to come in to sort out X, Y, or Z. And it may be in your best interest to at least come and talk to us and try and understand how we can help you too. And at that stage, everything is confidential. So this second person can talk to us about their innermost worries, their innermost thoughts, and know that that's not going to be shared with the other person. And we can then give them information accordingly and say, you definitely a MIAM would be helpful, because you'll find out what you can do to be able to stop all of this. But be aware that if you don't come into a MIAM, and we're not pressurizing you, we're just trying to help you, then the other person, once they've had their MIAM, if they wanted to, they could then progress to court. And if that happens for participant number 2, that could then be quite costly, take quite a long time, be quite stressful. So usually when they've heard all of this information, participant 2, most of them will say, actually, okay, yeah, I'll come in for a MIAM. I'll come and listen to what my options are. Some of the other reasons is a long-standing dispute, which, don't be put off by that. I've explained about that beforehand. And worrying about affordability. There are several options around this. First of all, mediation tends to be much cheaper than working with solicitors. Not because solicitors aren't doing a good job, they do a great job, but because we are working with the couples together. So therefore we get answers more quickly, and we're working to a certain format that we just move on meeting by meeting. So it's a lot quicker, which is one of the reasons why it's cheaper. That said, currently the Ministry of Justice are also offering couples, if they engage in mediation, a £500 discount voucher if they are going to discuss child matters in mediation. And so therefore each client will automatically be given a £250 discount into mediation. They can't use it for the MIAM because that's just the meeting to find out about what option they would like. But if they choose mediation, they can then use that voucher towards the costs. And last but not least, there is also legal aid for mediation. And the criteria for that is that you have to have, usually, by the way, you have to have one of the passporting benefits like PIP or universal credit. And if you have those, then it's highly likely that you and your partner will receive not only a free MIAM, but also some free mediation. So all of those things are there to help with costs, but all of that said, mediation is probably one of the cheapest options that you will come across. So it's never as expensive as you think it might be. So it's always worth investigating what options you have with mediators. Next slide, please, Helen. How do you refer to a mediator? Well, it's really quite easy, but first of all, a quick warning. Be careful, because a lot of people could call themselves a family mediator and they're not trained to do that. So the best way, where all the courts funnel people into, solicitors funnel people into, and really where you should funnel people into, is a website, which is shown here, called Family Mediation Council website. When you go on there as a customer, you can put in your postcode, and you can search for a mediator. The area can be expanded, so it can be up to 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever. And you can also restrict your search. So if you are looking only for a legal aid mediator supplier, you can tick that box. If you want a mediator that offers SIM, you can tick that box. So you can refine your search, then you hit the search button and up comes all the appropriately trained and qualified mediators in the area that you've asked for. And it also shows you their website, so you can go and have a look at their website, see if it's somebody you think you like to work with, and so on. So just really important to say, if you want to refer to a mediator, please go through that website. Next slide, please, Helen.
Okay, so Christine very kindly touched upon how we fund, or how you can fund mediation. Legal aid is available, as Christine has just pointed out, for family mediation. It's also important to say, and it links in with what you've just said yourself, Christine, about finding your local mediator to you on the Family Mediation Council website, is that with legal aid and clients that are entitled or eligible for legal aid, you need an accredited mediator to sign off on any forms. So it would make sense then to obviously find one that is able to do that. There are lots of services that provide family mediation from accredited and trained mediators, not as many that provide legal aid. So there are some that obviously, as Christine has pointed out, you can find through the Family Mediation Council that can kind of support clients. What you don't want to do is end up with clients going to a mediator that doesn't have a legal aid contract and then feeling they can't access mediation. Clients that are not eligible for legal aid will have to pay for the initial meeting, the MIAM, and the fees tend to vary, anything from sort of £100 to 130, in some places more. Some services include the court forms if the client needs it, and some services charge an additional fee on top of that. So it is important to sort of encourage those that are looking for that additional funding support to have a look at all of those various factors. The voucher scheme, as Christine has just pointed out, is extended, which is brilliant, for March 2025. It is just for children arrangements, so it doesn't support any individuals that are coming to mediation wanting to discuss finances. But often what I say to parents that are going through separation and divorce, that need to kind of look at everything holistically, the financial aspects we can't cover through the voucher, but when we start talking about the children, we can obviously use the voucher scheme. So it doesn't mean that if you're also having to sort out your finances, you can't apply for the voucher scheme. If we need to talk about children arrangements, then we can apply for the voucher scheme. And as Christine pointing out before, of course, with the voucher scheme, it is only available for those joint sessions. And the reason, on top of the kind of the ones that you mentioned, was also to stop clients just using it to then access the court system. We know that generally most people are better off trying mediation than they are in court. So there is this huge effort within the industry and the Ministry of Justice to try and get people actively involved in the process and at least trying it. And what we tend to say is that first joint meeting, you'll always know more than you did before you started. So in terms of it being covered financially, that's a good incentive, and just knowing your position's a bit better. So even if mediation doesn't progress beyond that, clients tend to find themselves in a much more, they find themselves in a space where they can understand what issues they're actually going to be taking to court. Next slide, please, Helen. So some case studies examples. So the first one listed there is where a MIAM meeting, we deem it unsuitable. So there was an example of this just the other week where a participant contacted me and was absolutely desperate to try and resolve things with the other party. because the other party had decided they wanted to move countries, and they booked their flights and they were leaving in 5 days. And at that point, you have to assess whether actually engaging the other party, whether it's suitable. And once I'd understood the entire history, and there was some severe domestic abuse as well, it was quite clear that actually, in terms of engaging them in mediation, wouldn't have resulted in what that parent was trying to achieve, which was to stop for a moment, just to pause everything from their child being taken. So in those instances, it's not suitable, and so mediation wouldn't progress. But where mediation is suitable and all the criteria is met, and by all the criteria, obviously both parties are extremely willing and wanting to give mediation a go. I had 2 people just the other week who actually both wanted to come to mediation and wanted to join the first meeting together. They were completely on the same page in terms of mediation being the right process. They'd done their research, they knew what to expect, and they understood kind of what it would mean for both of them to sort of participate. And so there was a real kind of willingness from them to engage in the process. And in that instance, of course, mediation is completely suitable, and off we went onto the joint sessions. Over to you, Christine.
So my 2 examples are going to look at how we identify issues and reach an agreement, and an example of what happened in a sim. So the first one, which is identifying issues, I had a young couple. Mum was very stressed about dad taking the child, didn't think he could look after the child properly, and had gone out overnight. He had the child one overnight, and when the child, it was a baby, when the child was in bed, he'd gone out, not left the baby alone, by the way, but had just gone out. And also there was another instance where nappies had not been changed, and the child had gone back soiled and things like this, and she just didn't trust him. So how we identified issues in that case, or how I did, is I asked her to talk to me about what were the things that were stopping her from trusting him. So we got a little list together. I'm obviously just going to talk about the nappies and the nighttime, otherwise we could be here all day. So the nappy thing was, I gave him the nappies and took him out. Right, okay, no nappies had been changed coming back. And then when the baby had stayed overnight, he'd gone out. So we then talked to dad, and we say, right, you've heard what mum's got to say. Like, do you have anything to say about that? Can you help us understand why perhaps all that happened? And dad's answer basically was, I didn't know I had to change a nappy. I just thought mum was going to do it. Like when I took it back, I didn't know I had to do it, but if she wants me to do it, I'll do it. Right, do you know how to change a nappy? Well, no, but I'll find out. My mum will show me, but fine. And then the overnight thing was all about, well, it was lovely having a baby overnight. Went to sleep, and I'm with my mum, and baby went to sleep, and I needed to go and get some cigarettes, whatever it was, something down at the shop. So I went down the shop and got the cigarettes, but baby was with mum. I wasn't out all night. And so we listened to these reasons, and then we would go back to mum and say, do you understand, and what things can we put in place to help build this trust back up again? And we will suggest things as well if mum's sort of getting stuck, and we might say, do you think it might be a good idea if you had, say, like a little book in the baby's bag, and you could write in there, please can you change baby's nappy at 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock, and obviously if they poo, and I've left the wipes, and can you make sure, there's some Calpol, can you make sure you're doing this, that and the other? And so the chat was like, yeah, I don't mind. And so that would be one suggestion. Obviously I'm not going to go into all of them, that would be one. And then the overnight was, I didn't realise it was a problem, because my mum was there. I only popped out, but if you don't want me to go again, I won't go again. I'll make sure that I stay with the baby, And if I do have to go, I'll ring you and I'll let you know. Yes, okay, that would make me feel better. Okay, so to get contact going again, should we try sort of like maybe spending a few hours with baby, and then go away from me for say a month, and then I don't know, once a weekend or however, see baby, and then come back and let me know how you're getting on, and then we'll see if we can perhaps progress to the next stage. So that's an example of how we would identify issues and try and reach agreement. SIM. I think the best case I can probably tell you about is the last case I did. It was two siblings, an older brother, younger brother. Mum and dad had been arguing over the fact that dad blamed mum that the siblings didn't see him that often. One of them, the older one, didn't really see him at all, or didn't see him at all. And he completely blamed mum. It was all mum's fault. And mum kept saying, it's not me, you don't understand, it's the kids, So they both decided they would like their children to come into SIM. So we did what I said before. It was organised. I saw both the children at their school, which was lovely. And I decided, because of the history that I'd been given about the particular case, I decided I would see both of the children together initially. And then I would ask the younger child to leave while I had a little chat with the older child as well on his own. And that's what happened. The younger child was very verbal, very open and chatty, and it's a fun meeting. It isn't depressing, really. Well, it isn't, and it isn't at all depressing. And we talked with the younger child, and the be all and end all with him was that he loved his dad, he wanted to see his dad, but he didn't like to go visit his dad because the parents lived a fair distance from each other. None of his friends were there, so he had to spend a lot of time in his shared room, and he shared a room with a child who was autistic. And he said he's all right, but I'm a bit worried about him, and he doesn't like football, and I love football, and he doesn't like football at all. He never talks to me about anything, and I just feel bored. I just don't like going there. Okay, so what would be a great way for it to work? Oh, I'd like Dad to come and see me at weekends and take me out for the day and then bring me home again. That's what I'd really like. Okay, great, thank you. So I said, do you want me to put that to Mum and Dad? Yes, blah, 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 blah. So that was him done, really, and off he went. And then the older one, so I said, you know the way we're working now. How's it been going for you? And what do you think? And how's it working at the moment? He said, I don't see my dad. Oh, okay. So is there a reason? Like, why would you mind telling me if there's why you don't? And he said, yeah, he said, when he left, he didn't tell me he was leaving. He didn't tell me where he was going. I just came home and I found my mum, and she was really upset. And she was all on her own, and I had to look after her. And he didn't come back for weeks. We never saw him. We didn't know where he was. And I don't think what he did was right. And I don't want to see him. Okay. Do you think he might like the opportunity to explain to you why he did that? He said, I don't want to talk to him. He said, I send him a text now and then, but I don't want to talk to him about it. No. I said, would you, no letters? No. I just want to send texts. Okay, thank you very much for telling me that. And off he went. So my duty, that it gave me permission to feedback. So my duty then was to go back and feed back to the parents. And you need to bear in mind, that's all I am doing. I am not a counsellor. So I go back to the meeting, I feed back and tell the parents, and also offer signposting, about where they may be able to get help. What it did as an overview was it put an immediate stop to the father blaming the mother. He could then hear for himself, which obviously wasn't very pleasant, but he could hear for himself that it was coming from the son. And they decided between them as parents that they would see how things go for a while, and that the father would come over at the weekends, take the younger one out, text the older one before, and see if he would then go with them, and this kind of thing, but no forcing. So the parents then started working together on what they could do to try and make things better for their children. And that's my job then done. I don't get, as I say, don't get involved with the counselling or anything like that, but that's my job done. And that's an example of how we hear children's voices. Next slide, please, Helen. There we are. Helen, could you join us, please? Bear with us, everybody. Here she comes.
Thank you both very much for that. I think it was a very useful presentation. I'm Helen. I'm here to just join Christine and Romina to put your questions to them. The first question, it goes right back to very close to the beginning, Romina, to one of your points that you raised. You were talking about the length of time that it takes, and you were talking about 5 to 7 sessions. So can you clarify whether it's generally for children's issues or finance issues or both? Because often you've spoken also about finance issues as well as children's issues, and is the 5 to 7 sessions if both issues are discussed, or does it tend to be for one or the other? I think Romina has just frozen.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I lost you for a second. Sorry, Helen, can you repeat the question?
That's
It
okay.
froze.
I thought you were concentrating very hard on the question.
No.
Saying you mentioned that the mediation often lasts for 5 to 7 sessions. Does that cover just children's issues, or does it tend to be children's issues with finances, which you also mentioned?
That's a really good question. So generally 5 to 7 encompasses mediation. We call it all issues mediation. So finances and children. We tend to see with children arrangements to be, lesser sessions. So unless Christine thinks differently, but I can't think of a case where it's gone.
I'll cut in.
Romina's having some issues with her connection there. Romina, we lost the end of you, but I think you were saying that 5 to 7 sessions tends to be for all issues and children's sessions tends to be shorter.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question now in relation to children's issues. It's about parents attending mediation following the making of an order. So if a court order's been made and they would like to vary the order, would they be able to come to mediation to talk about varying that?
Shall I take that one, Christine?
Yes, you start.
Yeah. So they can vary, they can come to us to talk about how they want to vary the order. And of course, remember, mediation is not a legally binding process. So they would then still need to, if they want it enforced as a court order, they would need to return back to court. But they can certainly talk about what they want to change and why they want to change it, and they're more likely to sort of reach an agreement that works for the unit as opposed to arguing it out in court.
So to come to you to reach an agreement to vary the order by consent?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is about what if domestic abuse isn't proven? So I think this was in relation to your slides that said you can have an exemption from coming to mediation, or exemption from the requirement to come to a MIAM if you have proven domestic abuse. But if there's domestic abuse that a participant is concerned about that they don't feel they can prove and they wouldn't have an exemption for, how would you deal with that? How would you assess that, Christine, if someone came to you?
Okay, so we tell them that the court would require proven domestic abuse. So that can include a myriad of things. It can be police reports, it can be letters from GPs, doctors, social workers. I'm just trying to think of all the other ones, but it's just something in writing rather than hearsay. So he or she did this to me. And so we would then say in those circumstances, did you report that? Was it reported anywhere? Have you spoken to anybody about it? Did you visit your GP? You know, all these kinds of things. So then instantly there's proof of what somebody has told you. So if they say no, but they don't want to see this person, they're frightened, they're worried about this person, then we would talk to them about shuttle. But yeah, it's anything that you can provide for, not us, it's for the courts to say, yeah, because if you apply to the court and say, I've got this exemption, I've got domestic abuse issues, you've just got to prove that. You've got to show it. You've got to bring along supporting paperwork, evidence to say that you've been embroiled in some way or another in domestic abuse. Lots of our clients will come to us and say, oh, you know, he shoved me when he went out the door, and he talks to me in a bad way, and he swore at me, told me to, and we'll say that we will explain that that's it's not proven domestic abuse. However, and we will signpost, obviously, if you feel that you want to talk to a person about that, you want to see a person, absolutely you should, and so on and so forth. So I hope that's answered the question.
So obviously when somebody comes to see you as well and they're coming to a MIAM, even if you might assess it as suitable because perhaps they haven't told you something, or you know you're not aware of something that's happened, people can choose not to go to mediation, can't they? So the requirement is to come to the MIAM. They're not required to go on to mediation. And you're assessing for suitability in terms of whether people are going to engage, whether they're going to feel safe in the mediation process as well. The issue about the proving the domestic abuse was just in relation to the exemption that you were talking about.
Yes, yes.
There were a couple of questions about that, so I hope we've answered those. Somebody else has, the person who asked about going back to court after an order's been made, has also asked would mediation in this context be covered by the family mediation scheme. I'm going to answer that one and say yes. Anybody who's got children's issues to resolve who hasn't already had a voucher can have a family mediation voucher. Legal age, you can go back within a certain, you know, if a certain period of time has passed after you've had legal aid previously. A voucher you can only have once, but if you haven't had it before, absolutely. Even if the matter's been to court, you can apply for a voucher. Right, Romina, we've got a question about online mediation. Can online mediation take place, and can shuttle mediation be done online?
Yes, every day by hundreds of mediators out there. So different mediators have different ways of conducting shuttle online. So sometimes some mediators will send them a separate link to each participant and kind of switch between the two links. And some mediators will have it similar to what we're doing with, you know, with our meetings, in that we will then place the various participants in their individual meeting room. So they're never seeing each other, they're never speaking to them. We reassure them, and sometimes we have to explain, because obviously it is shuttle, so they're not privy to the conversations, that we might end up spending a bit more time with one participant and to expect that to be normal, and it might be that we're unpicking a particular point, and then we will try to obviously keep that fair and spend the same amount of time with the other participant as well. So yes, it all happens online, and we do shuttle as well.
Okay. There's a question also about whether it's possible to complete shuttle mediation where there are reports of low-level domestic abuse. I think we might have covered that when talking about whether the participants feel safe, or whether, you know, there are other indicators.
And I think it comes into also the fact that, let's not forget, mediation's voluntary. So even if as a mediator you might think that it seems perfectly suitable, the participant needs to feel that they can engage, and they need to feel like it's the right process. And often I've had sometimes participants believe that they couldn't mediate because they had a history of domestic abuse, and that's not necessarily the case. It's about us finding together the right sort of format that works for them in mediation. So even if there's been a history, they can still mediate if they feel that they can have a voice, if they feel safe to do so.
Thank you. We've got a question about whether you can provide parents with guidance of your professional opinion or ideas of what suggestions would be if they were stuck in mediation. I think is if they if they can't find a way through, although you can't offer advice, can you suggest that they try certain things?
Absolutely is the answer. We'll often work with the nappy and the overnight stay was an example of that. So yes, we will suggest things. Have you tried thinking about this? They may be sort of stuck in a rut over one particular decision. One's there, one's there. They're not going to move. We will try and get them to talk about other options. Well, look, I know you really wanted this or you really wanted this, but is there any way we could possibly meet in the middle somewhere? Would you give a little bit of that and you give a little bit of that? Because really, at the end of the day, if a decision cannot be reached, then really you need someone to make that decision for you, and that's usually somebody like a judge or a magistrate. But it's better for the participants if they can understand that and see that and have that explained to them. But yes, of course, we give them, depending on their circumstances. I mean, there's lots of, the examples I gave over the nappy and the overnight stay were just examples. There's lots of other things that we can offer, and like putting a book in the bags, or signing up to an app where parents can talk. This kind of thing. So we're all constantly offering suggestions, but we just cannot tell them what they should be doing.
Thank you. I have a question here about if something goes wrong in the mediation, specifically in the event of a confidentiality agreement. You mentioned, Romina, at the beginning about mediation being confidential. And if you're online, what happens if a third party was covertly present during an online mediation?
So we do explain to participants before they obviously engage in the joint session, and all mediators do send out a confidentiality agreement, which kind of states that the mediation is conducted by the mediator and just those two parties present. So in the event that there is someone else and it becomes quite apparent that someone else is present in the room, we would simply stop the mediation because, of course, that is a breach. And we would then obviously take it offline and contact the participants to understand what happened and where we go from here. Interestingly enough, of two examples linking to that. So the other week it was we'd had a mediation session and I was observing a trainee, and we got an email afterwards from a participant to say they were absolutely convinced that someone else was in the room with the other party. Now, in that instance, all we can do, of course, is offer the reassurance that if mediation proceeds to a second session, that we ask everybody to kind of show their surroundings. We cannot physically guarantee that someone doesn't slip out of the room and then comes back in. So really, it's about trusting whether what you are both going to say and do in the mediation is what you're going to follow through with. We can't make people disclose scenarios without if they don't want to. We can do our best, but there's a limit. And the other example was just yesterday I had a client saying to me, before I engage in a joint session, can I ask that I get to see the room that the participant's in, because I'm absolutely convinced he will not attend it on his own. So we're managing scenarios like that to the best of our abilities, but we just have to remind participants that the idea about mediation is that you're both trying to work on a solution, and that means start to build very slowly trust. And the moment that that's broken, that kind of makes everything really challenging, not just for the mediator, but even for what they're trying to achieve.
Thank you. The next question is about what happens if somebody starts mediation and they're trying to make progress. In fact, they might make some progress, but then mediation breaks down. What would you do to help participants move on and resolve the final issues?
Do you want me to take that one?
Sure, yeah.
if we're in mediation and one party says, I don't want to carry on, or this isn't working, or, you know, they might both say that, they both say, or we say it sometimes, we say, I'm very sorry, but this, you know, my professional opinion of this is not working. We're not keeping on track, we're not doing the things we're supposed to do, and it is not working. Or they might go, don't like it. So basically, we just say that's absolutely fine. Remember, it's a voluntary process, and we can't keep them there if they don't want to be there. But we would literally then just signpost them to other, you know, talk to them again about, look, you've got these other resolution options that you can move to if you wish to, don't forget. And should you want court sign off, because one might want to move to court, but, you know, should you want court sign off, we can offer that as well. But we're very sorry it didn't work for you, and we have to send them on their way.
So you're helping them identify their next steps in terms of how they will be resolving things.
Identify where
Okay.
they're going.
Thank you. We've just about reached the end of our time. We'll finish with one more question, if that's okay. Christine, during your presentation, you said if you had £1 for every time somebody had said, oh, well, you know, I'll try mediation, but the other party won't, or they'll refuse. And then obviously, you know, actually when you write to them, you find they come in. What sort of success rate do you get with your mediations in that kind of scenario where people start off absolutely? I mean, I suppose the question is to both of you, you know, where people start off absolutely convinced it's not going to work. In your experience, does it generally work? Or, you know, are there, if somebody comes in like that, do you find you're sending them off unresolved at the end of it?
98% success rate for me. I don't know about
I agree. And that's why I was smiling when Christine made that comment, because it's absolutely true. And I think generally they come into mediation absolutely convinced that they're going to go off to court because the other party won't engage or we won't get anywhere. And 9 times out of 10 we make, you know, fantastic progress. And that's why we say mediation should be the first step that everyone at least hears about.
It's actually really important to get them in the room together if it's safe and suitable to do so, or at least into the mediation together, because you've talked about shuttle as well. That's great. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you both very much. Thank you everybody for joining us as well. This recording will be available on the FMC YouTube channel from tomorrow if you want to watch it again or refer to anybody else. So thank you everybody and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.